the email or anything like that. Lisa will actually be sharing today. You know, the sermon series that we've been in the last several weeks, Escaping Egypt, it's kind of interesting. As I've told you numerous times, I only expected that series to be for 2 weeks, and here we are getting ready to go into week 8. And it's just amazing how God works, and the reason that whole series came about, it was because of what I saw how God had been moving in my life and Lisa's life, and on the journey we've been on with Nick. Those of you who've been here for any length of time know that it's literally been hell on earth. And but we've learned so much about ourselves, and we've more importantly learned so much about God. And in the times, just as the Israelites wandered around in the wilderness wondering, God, where are you? God, why have you led us out here to abandon us? We at times have said the same thing. But just as the Israelites learned they were never abandoned, that God was there with them and God had a plan the whole time, we have learned that same thing as well. And so you guys have been an integral part of this whole journey. I mean, I've shared, if I've not shared it corporately, I've shared it individually, that we would not be where we are right now without all of you. You were the safety place where we could come each week and be encouraged and strengthened to go and face what we had to face the rest of the time. And so that's why we thought that it's important that we share this story with you, to thank you, to rejoice with you, to cry with you, and to gain encouragement with you as well. And so a couple of weeks ago, Lisa shared her testimony at a women's retreat. And so, you know, I thought the timing was great to ask her to come and share that. I will ask you to pray for her, as she has been sick the last couple of weeks and went to the doctor Friday. So, by the way, you're on the tail end of the flu. And so I asked the important question that some of you wondering now. She is not contagious. She's been quarantined, and the doctor assured us no, so we wouldn't do that to you. There's enough sickness going around, so we would not do that. But do pray for her as she comes and shares. As a matter of fact, let's go to Lord in prayer now. Father, thank you for this important message that we're going to hear today of how you are always at work, even when we don't see you at work. Even when we may question, even though we're told not to question, Lord, because of your grace and your mercy, you understand that we are mere humans and that you are God, you are all-knowing, you are all-powerful. And Lord, as hard as this journey has been, I thank you for the lessons that you have taught my family. And it is my prayer today that as we listen to this story, that those that are struggling with whatever it is they are facing this morning, they will see that you are just as involved in their life. And that you have a plan and a purpose for them if they will seek you in your will. So Lord, I pray for Lisa this morning. I pray that you strengthen her. I pray that she will speak with clarity. I pray that you will keep the sickness, the cough, and all of that at bay, and allow her to just share what a great God you are. Lord, we thank you and ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Like John said, I shared this a couple of weeks ago at the ladies' retreat, and it was difficult, way more difficult than I thought it would be, and then I thought here would be a lot easier, and I think it's going to be difficult. So I do ask that you pray for me. I do want to say that at their ladies' retreat a year ago, as right when some stuff was going on with Nick, oh my heart. You just don't know how much we love you guys. It is a lot for me to stand before you, who I know loves us, and we love you more than you know. At the ladies' retreat last year, it was right at that time that Nick was really going through some stuff. Some stuff was really starting to derail. Even though we had been on this journey of addiction and depression and behavior for 4 years, some things had happened that week, and I showed up at the ladies' retreats just pitching a royal fit. I told her, I said, there's a sacrifice of praise, and then there is a temper tantrum, and I do not want to be here. There is not one part of me. I'm not mad at God. It's not that I'm running away from hearing from God, but I just was not in the mood to be spiky-haired, fun Lisa, play the piano, talk to everybody. I wanted to be in a hole under a blanket and just be sad. But I knew that I had to do that, and I did. And after we did the first worship set, it's a Friday and Saturday retreat. This girl gets up and shares her testimony, and she shares her testimony on depression and anxiety. And I'm telling you, I just felt like the rug just ripped out from under me. And God just completely broke me, and I knew then that He was breaking me in that moment to start rebuilding me. And we all knew that the next year at that same retreat was when I needed to share that testimony. And it was powerful, and it's powerful to tell it now. I prayed real hard that God would give me some direction in doing it, and I have these pages with very large handprint, so I am going to try really hard to stick to this, and I just pray that y'all will just pray for me that what needs to be said will be said. As I was preparing to do this, I realized that it was absolutely overwhelming to tell Nick's story, but it was exhilarating to tell God's story. And that was the place I had to get, that when I focused on Nick, I had tears of fear as a mother that just would overtake me. But when I started thinking about God's story, I had tears of faith as a child of God. And I think that's so important when we look back at what God's done in our lives. And it's important that we not cherish the sin. There's a scripture that says we don't cherish the sin, but we need to embrace the lessons. And so it is not my desire to tell you any more details of Nick's story than are necessary for you to understand the importance of the lessons and the importance of what God has done in our life. And that really is what I'm hoping that you will hear in your heart. And I felt like God led me. I always say, I'm really, really, really hesitant when it says, God told me, unless I got a text message from God or an email from God, I'm not going to tell you God told me something, because I'm not real sure of that. That's a big claim. I know we can hear the voice of the Lord, but we should be real careful. But I do believe God used the creativity in me and the personality in me and the gifts that He's given me to impress upon me a formula in which to tell the story. And as it came together, I knew that I felt like it was what God was telling me. And I wanted to do it on drugs, because drugs were Satan meant to kill and steal, but God meant to redeem and reveal. Satan meant for drugs to destroy Nick, and God meant for Nick's drugs to define Nick. And so as an acronym of drugs, I want to share our story. For D in drugs, I think direction. And it's just when you're going through something, whether you're going through something with drugs yourself, with addiction yourself, with someone you love is going through drugs, or anything that you're going through. I think the first thing we have to do is find out our direction. Where are we? We need a reality check for where we are, because we're not going to stay where we are. We're going to need to move somewhere. We're going to have to make a decision to move to God, away from God, with God, without God. And I'm hoping this is where all of this really, really, really starts to come together, because I'm feeling very nervous and very all over the place. And I don't like that. But when I got ready to share my testimony the week before, I'm like, Lord, where would I even start on direction, on where we're going? Where do you even start on that? It's such a long story. There's just been so much that's happened, and I could talk to you for 10 hours and not tell you everything. And it doesn't matter for your mouth to drop and say, wow, you went through that, or wow, Nick overcame that. And I'm telling you, not an hour and a half before we got ready to leave for the conference, I was looking for this notebook, which has scriptures in it, And out of nowhere, I found this notebook, and it wasn't in the junk room or a room I hadn't been in 5 years. It was in the room in the living room, so I don't even know how it got in there or how I had not put my hands across it in the last, 5 years. But I knew then that God had showed me how to start you on the direction of where we were. Because this right here says Saturday, March 14th, 2014. 1 week ago tonight, we faced the single most horrific moment of our life. And this is where it started. Tom came to me while John was finishing the introduction of his sermon. I was running AV, which I never do. He said he needed me. I said I couldn't. That was my first lesson, because this has made me challenge myself. Am I there when I need to be? Yes, I was valid to stay committed in that moment, but I discovered a desire in myself to make sure that I'm not quick to say I can't. Tom then told me that Nick had passed out, and when we got to the lobby, he told me, gently touched my arm and said, he says he's taking sleeping pills and he smells like alcohol. My brain couldn't comprehend what he was saying to me. Did someone hold him down against his will and pour pills and alcohol down his throat? I couldn't comprehend what he was telling me. But there in the back seat of Tom's car was my baby. He was drooling all over himself. He was in and out of consciousness. His eyes were rolled back in his head. What did you take, Nick? Sleeping pills, he managed to mumble. How many? I don't know. My heart has never felt, it's freezing, babe. I love you. My heart has never felt, see, I get what, did you see how nice that was? It does not happen like that at home. At home, I can promise you the response would be, get a Snuggie.
Only because she's the guest speaker today.
Thank you. All right. My heart has never felt the weight it felt in that moment. In my gut, all I could think was, what has he done and why? I had to get John. We had to get to the hospital. I walked to the back of the church and looked at my amazing man of God bringing a sermon called Live Like You Were Dying. That was when I filled this notebook, I would have never remembered that. This is happening, and the sermon John is preaching is Live Like You Were Dying. I told him I was sorry, but I needed him. He hesitated because we don't interrupt services. We never have. As I walked to get my purse, I said, John, it's Nick. Something's wrong and we have to go. You could hear a panicked and compassionate hush throughout that group of people we love and lead. After I spoke the words I never thought I would say to the father of my children, his return gaze to me was filled equally with terror and somehow strength. He stepped back in the church and asked them to pray that Nick had passed out. Nick returned to Tom's car with Jeannie in my footsteps. It took a moment to get our plan together, which was stupid, but it did. And in that time, God sent out Katina, an old friend who was visiting our church for only the second time. We had nothing to share but the truth, because Nick's life in that moment was worth more than his reputation or ours. Her calm but stern words, she's a nurse, confirmed the seriousness of the situation. Tom drove. Jeannie rode with us. Tom was getting his keys, and I rode in the back seat holding my baby. His body was dead weight against mine. I couldn't keep him conscious. My horrific thoughts tormented me that my Nicholas could die in my arms, while my voice repeated in hysteria, what has he done and why? Somehow in my soul, I felt like his physical person was safe because we were on the way to help. I just had to keep him awake. He moaned loudly and he groaned with desperation, and he cried, he wept, and so did I. We've always privately worried that Nick would be our impulsive kid who would try things. Things, yes, but this, I was absolutely terrified for the condition of my son's soul, his self-esteem, his willpower, and his struggle. I screamed with emotion, not anger, for Jeannie to call my parents. She said she could. Nick's in trouble. Meet us at the hospital. I heard Jeannie on the phone for a moment. I felt that long gone fear of what people was going to think creep into my soul. I prayed for God to take it away from me, and He did. Jeannie was on the phone with John, who I was later told sprinted across the parking lot to his car. John, my spiritual head and leader of our home, said to go to South Strand instead of Waccamaw. Later, that would prove to be one of the God moments in the hours ahead of us. We arrived at the hospital on 2 wheels, and God showed my heart what a wonderful family we had. Tom was a rock. I was calmed by his strength. Jeannie was a rock. She loves those grandbabies with all her soul, but in those moments, she let me be mom and was strong when I wasn't. I couldn't wait for my parents to get there. But more importantly, I needed to lay my eyes on John. They met us at the ambulance entrance and tried to assess the situation. Again, I had to give voice to the unspeakable. All he can say is he took sleeping pills and he doesn't know how many. Tom added that he smelled like alcohol. They looked at me the way people look at parents with a child completely out of control. A mother's heart rebelled against the reality that surrounded me. Nick was getting louder and louder. We could barely speak over him. The doctor looked at me and said, "Could this be a suicide attempt?" I said, "What? What?" But then I realized I couldn't say no, because I didn't know. I tried to convince them that this was the first time anything has happened. It was nothing had ever happened with Nick. There was nothing, and this was the first time. The look in their eyes told me they didn't believe me. I'm usually strong. We've faced a lot of serious challenges in our life, but I've always been so strong. I wasn't strong, I was a mess. I couldn't handle it. I moved past the curtain into the small entryway where I could no longer see him, but I couldn't avoid the sound of his screams. I collapsed to the ground and wept. As I walked along to the door to the waiting room, I saw John, and I wasn't alone anymore. I buried my head in his chest and cast my fear into the safe place God gave me more than 20 years ago. Then I looked at him, and our hearts spoke without words. Okay, we've got to go and do this. And then from there we led it. Throughout that night, we discovered that sleeping pills wasn't the answer. Somehow in his state, he didn't want us to know that he'd been drinking, so he told it was sleeping pills. He's such a knucklehead. I mean, he's a good liar, but he's a bad liar. It doesn't line, it just doesn't line up. I'm just going to tell them, even 2 times the legal limit drunk, that I took sleeping pills, so I won't get in trouble for drinking. But it wasn't sleeping pills, but he was 2 times the legal limit drunk. We found out later that night that they had called the police and weren't reliable to call DSS, and we almost lost him that night. But the police said they could tell that this was the first time for our family and that we were going to be, in control of that. So that's the direction. I thought it was important. It was one thing for you guys because you've walked through it with us, but when I was preparing it for this ladies' retreat, they don't know our knucklehead family. You guys know us. But they don't, and it was a good place to start, but I think it's a good place for all of us to start. Some of us were here, some of us know it, some of us weren't. But many of us were. And at that time, the boys had been off to college. Nick had, they'd been out to college for 8 months. That was important. Now that we look back, he'd been home alone. I thought about last night, Willow had died 2 weeks before that, and that broke Nick's heart. It's kind of where we were, that we needed the reality of where we were, and this is where we were. But another very good part of direction, I think, is deciding who's going to be around you. In order to move forward, you've got to know who are you putting around you to help you move forward. Because we can put the right friends around us that can feel so bad for us, that can somehow, we can wallow in it, and just in that wallowing, we can feel better. And we might feel better and we might feel justified, but do we feel propelled to now move forward and perhaps do some hard things that are necessary to actually make a difference? You need to put those people around you. And the most amazing part of this entire thing is that Nick decides to get drunk for the first time in his life that we know of. So he does it and comes to church. Like I said, that's the one thing Shane's told us, that honesty is the best thing that happens when you get sober, because you've been lying for so long. And addicts are great liars. I say that as the mother of one, and, Shane has been so good at just giving us all this information. But sometimes they're really stupid liars. And so my knucklehead says, I'm going to get drunk and go to church, because that's what we're going to do. And I felt like God said, drink up. Drink up. So in one case, we're like, what? You knucklehead? And on the other hand, God said, John and Lisa, you don't have to walk through this alone. I'm going to let Nick do this, and he's going to come to church. And the people that you're going to need to talk to, you're going to be open to talk to, because I'm providing a way for you to talk to them. Because it was hard. I'm sure we would have opened up, but that's hard to do. You want to protect your child. You want to protect your own image. You want to protect all that. But God said, we're going to go to church and do this. So then if Nick, because he didn't, he's been great about those things, or he's lied really great about it, either way. Could say, well, you told everybody at church. No, actually, knucklehead, you came to church drunk. You told everybody at church. We just got your drunk self out of church trying to figure out what was wrong with you, So he couldn't even. God just immediately, he knew the journey ahead, and he said, this is your direction. These are the people I'm putting in your corner. This is who I'm putting at church. This is who I'm putting at that hospital. This is who I'm putting in the back of your car. I remember Buddy was there, and he said something about something that had happened with him one time, that the church, the youth pastor had said that the church was disappointed in him, and that God was disappointed, or that something of that nature. And so he pulled, once we were at the hospital and realized that where we were, he pulled John out and told him that. And we might have told Nick that the next day. We very may well have said, Nick, we're disappointed in you. And God, even in those small things, was telling us, don't say that. He was putting the right people. He put Shane there. So it's really important to find your direction of where you're going. That next morning, thankful for the direction we had, particularly from Shane and from Buddy. John just asked. Because see, the funny thing is, too, this could have happened on a Monday, not at church, and we could have done what we do and gotten in our own. Look, we struggle, especially through this. We've been really mad at God. We have been as far away from God as we could be. But God said this is going to happen on a Saturday when John's in the middle of preaching, and he's got to get up and go preach again on Sunday. Seriously? God just knew. He said, I know that I'm going to have to keep you connected to me, because you're going to pull away. So my parents stayed with him Sunday, and the next morning, John, we sat down with him, and he just said, Nick, I just want to know what you're thinking. And Nick said, I have been sad since 6th grade. It's the first thing he said. And because God had put all of those things in place, and all of that wisdom and all of that direction, we knew then what direction to take with Nick. Yes, we needed to respond to his behavior, but there was also something majorly going on with him in depression and anxiety and bullying and all of those things. The next thing that we, for drugs is R, and I said reckless love. And God's reckless love has been as much about me and John as it has about Nick. And I wanted to read something to you. I don't know, John may have read this to you at some point, but it was actually that this particular day, I don't even remember when it was in this situation. I think it was a couple of years after that time, so something else was going on with Nick. And it was my birthday, and I was ticked off about it because I didn't want to celebrate anything, much less myself. And I didn't want people, hey, Lisa, we love you, happy birthday, da, da, da. I'm like, shut up. You know when you're just like, stop paying attention to me. So my friends ignored me and took me to lunch, made me mad. I didn't want to go with them. I didn't like them. I didn't like John. I just didn't want to be, just one of those things when I didn't want to be celebrated. And I was with several of my friends, and I just told them, I said, it's one thing for me, but John, Carol, you remember this. Roxy, you remember this. John is so down. He is so low, and I can't help him. He is so scared, and he always has the right answers, and we don't have the right answers for our son, and it's killing me. It's absolutely killing me, and I can't give myself the freedom to find release because I'm so worried about him. And so we talked about it, and then we had lunch, and I went back to work, and all this. So I get back to work, and John calls me, and Carol and Lindsay and Karen were at work, and they could hear me talking to John, and they're like, is she crying? Is she having a nervous breakdown? I mean, there was major emotion, but they couldn't figure out what it was. And what was happening was John was telling me what the nurse had just told him. And he had been to this doctor's appointment. It was a new doctor he had not been to, and he did not know this woman. And the woman was really, really timid and really nervous, but asked him, said, do you mind if I share something with you? And John says, okay. And she said, are you a pastor? And he said, yes, ma'am. And she said, God told me to tell you, don't you quit. People look to you for guidance. You are anointed. I see your hand on a young man's head. Does he have sandy blonde hair? He says, yes, but he's been dyeing it green and blue. So, yeah, that's what I thought too. But and then she says, don't take your hand off of him. I see you struggling. You want to go in one direction, and he's pulling in to go another. Don't remove your hand, and don't you let go. And in that moment, I was so glad that God saw Nick, but I was so glad that God saw John. And he's a knucklehead. He gets on my nerves. Y'all think he's wonderful. He's a real knucklehead. But he's my man. And that's been the hardest. One of the hardest things is the two of us watching each other hurt, but he cared enough, and now not only in that moment was it something great, but John has that to hold on to forever. Forever. Not just that day. That wasn't like a conditional God sees him, and he did not know this nurse, right? You did not know the nurse. She was not one of those holy roller, name it, claim it, crazies that's like, I have a voice of the word of the Lord. She was nervous about doing this. It was a total God thing. And he's got that forever. And that's the kind of reckless love that God has shown us. And the thing that I've been able to tell the thing I've been able to tell Nick is I know that you are working on your higher power and who you're struggling, who it is. But whatever your options are, Buddha, I don't know who they all are, whatever. John would say Oprah for Carol's benefit. But whatever your other options are, there is no God, no higher power, being, person, universe in control that would stop and care enough to stop the world to save your life as many times as it has been saved, other than the kind of God with the capacity to love. I'm like, baby, you don't have to get that, but I gotta tell you that. You know, it's okay with me if you don't believe that. You're wrong. You're wrong if you don't, and I'm gonna love you till you're right. But that's just the truth, baby. Nobody, you don't matter that much to this world. You are not that important. Nobody is. But there have been times that you have tried to take your own life. There have been times that you have done knucklehead stuff and driven cars completely high that you should have wrecked, and that there are so many times, and only God loves you like that. And the other part of reckless love is God taught me and John how to love Nick with his kind of reckless love. Because so many times we may be going through something with God, and we're like, you know, if you really loved us, then why is this still happening? You know, if you loved us that much and you saw how much X, Y, or Z is hurting us, and you love us, and you're in control, and you hold the whole world in your hands, then why don't you stop it? Well, God sees everything, and we have to understand that His love, His reckless love, is sometimes expressed in ways that we don't understand in the moment. And especially loving a child, an addict, that's your child, it's really, really hard because you're scared. You are absolutely paralyzed with fear that everything they want, if you don't give it to them, that they're going to do something to hurt themselves, and then you're going to have to live with that guilt. It is absolutely terrifying. It's terrifying. And I've told Nick, I said, Nick, there's two things. Because it's not always, Nick is in this, he's been in recovery since May. He's relapsed twice, which is a pretty good record for someone, especially 19 years old in recovery. A lot of his stuff has been just immaturity and poor decisions and financial stuff and getting mad at somebody or not going to work, and all of those things are as big a part of all of this because of the results that can happen during that moment. And I tell him, I said, Nick, there's two things. Number one, when you call us and something's all up awry and we've got you calling on one phone, the recovery people calling on another because you're just acting fool, whatever, first we have to decide if we're going to do something, then we have to decide what we're going to do. And either one of those is very, very difficult. And through God's reckless love, He has showed us that it's okay to love Nick with reckless love. And He's shown us that what you feel like might be the right answer just by the way you feel may not be what's best for someone in recovery. And sometimes no is the best thing. And leave the consequences to God, even if those consequences aren't great. And that's been one thing we've had to learn. I said in the very beginning that I did not want to tell parts of the story unless they were necessary. So, therefore, I'm going to tell you a part right now that I feel is very, very important to tell you. Any kids in here? We talked. I agreed to do this testimony for the retreat in December. 5 days later, Nick fell apart. Completely fell apart. He relapsed. He made some really poor decisions. To be honest, there's some things that happened that there was an investigation in his life that could have resulted in 25 years prison time. And listen, I done told you he came to church drunk. I have no reason to tell you lies about what he does or doesn't do. He did not do this. There was evidence and the investigation was dropped. But it was very, 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 very hard. And he was going through a lot of stuff in that moment. And the week, 3 days before that, they had called and they had taken him to the hospital because he felt suicidal. And then 4 days later, after we found out some other things, they messaged me and said, you need to get up with the recovery people to get him to the hospital. I said, I don't, why? I mean, they're not just going to take him. At the end of the story, that night they did get him to a mental health facility, and I talked to the guy before they transferred him somewhere for 7 days. The guy told me, he said, it's one thing for someone to feel suicidal, but it's something else when they actually go through a plan. And I know that this man thinks I know exactly what he's talking about, so I don't ask any questions because I'm afraid he's stopped talking to me. So I'm just taking in what he's saying, and I could tell that something had happened. Something had happened. So the next day, Nick finally calls, and oh my gosh, how great it was to hear his voice. We were so worried about him. At this time, this investigation was still in full swing. Now he's in a involuntary institution. This is just in December. This is not 8 weeks ago. I said, Nick, how are you doing? He said, I'm better. I'm doing all right. I'm like, Nick, can we really talk? Can we really talk? And I said, Nick, I need to know what happened last night. And Nick had tried to hang himself. But I tell you that, not because it's a gory detail that needs to be told, but I tell you so I can talk to you about reckless love. Because we started talking. He said, Mom, every time I tried to do it and I felt pressure on my neck, all I could think about was you and Dad and how much you love me. I told him, I said, Nick, buddy, I said, your life is kind of a train wreck. You got a lot going on. And I'm glad that as much as you knew you got an investigation hanging over your head, you can have some serious consequences. I'm glad that as much as you knew you have relapsed. I'm glad that you knew you possibly have no place to live. You about to tick me and Daddy off. You about on our last nerve. You are about to force us to have to just let you do this on your own. But I'm so glad that as much as you knew all of that, you knew those things, you also knew that we loved you. And in that moment, he began to hear everything he'd been hearing for the last 8 months. He really began to get it. And it was so important that we love people, not the way they want us to love them, but the way God tells us to love them. You in Drugs is for Unashamed. Satan wins when he uses us to spread the lie that life is easy. Remember, all this happened in church. So God removed that shame for us immediately. And we're very fortunate in that. That's not always the case. Because I'm not saying that you need to go out and tell all the details of something. You need to be careful for that. And I want you to know that Nick knows everything I'm saying today. Everything. I told him the details I would share. He said, Mom, I trust you. It's your story too. I trust you. So I'm not telling you. It's not mine. It is our story, but it's still his story. But Nick even understood how important it is to not be ashamed. Because the world is walking through some hard crap, and life sucks. The world is hard. And when we walk around acting like everything is not just okay, but like, woohoo, great, then when they go through stuff, they have no resource. They have nothing to say. You know, they're not going to pick up the Bible like we've been trained to do. They're not going to come to the church and come to the altar like we've had the expectation to do. They're not going to call their Christian friends like we have to do. They're just going to start opening their eyes and looking around and saying, who says they're Christians? Who do I see that says they're Christians? And if all of us are acting like everything's all right, Satan's like, this is fantastic. Not only do I have the people that believe in God struggling, I've got the people that are looking to them, not even giving God a chance. There's a way to live our lives with vulnerability that does not expose the preciousness of the discretion of what we're going through, but that does share in a way so that people will know that there is a God we can lean on and his way does work. Dr. Phil said, you know, Oprah's best friend. Dr. Phil said that people talk 125 words a minute. I might be a little higher on that. Okay. The average person talks 125 words a minute, but they think 1,200 to 1,400 words per minute. And his point is that when someone tells you something in really a short amount of words, something that's going on, we hear that and then we play it over and 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 over in our head, because we can think so much more than we can actually speak, and that makes us anxious, that makes us afraid, that makes us play out all the what ifs, and all of that leads us to shame. All of that immediately takes us to a place where we don't want to share what's going on. And we just need to be mindful of that. G in drugs is gratitude. Randy, our counselor, told us when we first went to him, when Nick said he'd been sad since 6th grade, there were a couple of things we did. We told him we were going to talk to him about, we were going to go see our counselor, and we also called Shane, and the night he came to church drunk, he also went to an NA meeting. You know, maybe we were wrong in doing that, but Tom said you can overreact or you can not react. But you got to, you know, want one or the other. And we're like, you know, Nick, right now, I'm not saying, and I've ended up reading the rest of my stuff. Man, oh my gosh, if you could read it, I'm like, hey, he's not an addict, but he's on the way there. I mean, it was just like so scary to read all that. But we told him, said, we just have to look at what's happened just today. And based on what's just happened today, that's where you're headed, and we've got to respond to that. You know, that's what we've got to do. But the other thing that we did is we took him to see Randy, and our Christian counselor, who's fabulous. And Randy asked us if we had thanked God for it yet, and we're like, no. And he's like, you know, you need to do that. We're like, you need to give us a minute, because we're not really, you know, we're going to pray about it, but thank God for it. I know we've been doing this a while, and we're supposed to know how this works, but that's all right. We're going to, do you have any other options on how to handle this? Because that is not really working for us. And he reminded us of James, it says to count it all joy when you go through various trials. Because those trials is what produce character and perseverance and endurance, and they continue until nothing is lacking in you. And God only allows trials in our life because he sees that things are lacking in us that he wants to complete. He wants us to be complete. He wants Nick to be complete. He sees that things are happening in Nick's life. So he's got to let these things play out. And because he trusted us to be his parents, he's got to let them play out in our life. And therefore, we've got to thank him for those things. And that's one of the things we really, really learned through all of this, is to be thankful. In fact, throughout this thing, when he's called and we've, you know, gone to pray, we've literally said, it's your turn. And don't forget to thank God. Like, I ain't even lying. Thank you, Jesus. Like, but sometimes God's just like, I'll take it. You know, I'll take that. I'll take that. It's not easy, but it's necessary. And gratitude absolutely comes from the Word. And there was a time that Nick was going through something. He was at Grand Strand Hospital. I'm not going to, well, he had had kind of a psychotic break, and during this thing that was going on, in the end, he had actually taken way too many Ativan, because I wrote anxiety on the bottle, but for whatever reason, God didn't have it show up on the blood test, so they didn't know what was going on with him. So they thought he had schizophrenia. It was absolutely terrifying. It was completely terrifying. I think he was 15. John had gone home because I had just started a new job, and I knew I had to go to work. Karen was in Alaska, so we knew that they were talking about moving him to Charleston. And during that time, Nick had this really, really, really bad break, and he was screaming his head off, and they were trying to get him strapped to the bed. And I left. I called Donna. She said, it's going to get hard before it's going to get better. You go in there and be strong. You'll end up being the enemy, but you can do this. So I went in there, and I'm at his head, and Nick is screaming because he said, I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to go to hell. There's a boat coming, and the man in the boat is taking me to hell. And it was just the weirdest thing. And at one point, he started to put his hands around my neck, and he started choking me because he thought I was taking him to hell, and it took 2 of the nurses to get him off of me. It was just terrifying, but in the end, it showed the spiritual battle in my son. There he was. I mean, he sounded like a street preacher, like one of them crazy preachers with a little poster board. We're crazy, but we're not that kind of crazy, you know? I mean, we try and be, relatable, not cuckoo crazy Christians. And here he is just screaming like an old-time preacher man, and we're like, what in the world? But it was like God was showing us one more time what was going on with him. He didn't want to go to hell. In fact, he had to tell the guy that was at his head, are you going to heaven or are you going to hell? And I looked at him and I said, man, I don't know what you know about Jesus, but tell him you love Jesus and you're going to heaven. If y'all want him strapped to this bed, apparently most of us need to go to heaven right now because he's worried to death that we're all taking him to hell. It was really kind of funny and odd, just odd, but then once it all stopped, it just took me out. But I said all that because during that time, when that was one of the really, really bad things, and people started to find out, because remember, Nick came to church drunk, so now when we're at the hospital with Nick, maybe he has the pneumonia. No, remember he came to church drunk? We don't really know what Nick did, so now we, we're a little more open, but, so people, this is probably 2 years later, it was 2015, and people started messaging, what can we do? And I said, what you can do is send me scriptures that God gives you to pray over Nick. And all the way to right here is scriptures that you guys sent us during that time. And every time you would send me a scripture, we would write it down and who it was from. And that's gratitude. When you're going through something, that's gratitude. You say, God, I don't get it. And quite frankly, you are on my last nerve. But I know that somewhere you're doing something that I can't see. And even when I don't want to hear what you have to say, and I don't want to pick up your word, I'm going to ask the people that love me to pick it up for me. That's gratitude. The other thing that's real important about gratitude, we had never talked about Nick needing rehab, in-house rehab. He had done drugs. He was getting drug tested every week. It was trying this, trying that. We had absolutely no idea that it was to the point it was. So when we had kicked him out last year and he went and saw Shane, and then he came back and he asked if we can talk, and I'm like, well, I'll let you in, but we'll see how the conversation goes. No promises, But he said, I've talked to Shane and I need to go to rehab. And we were just like, what? We had no idea that was even to the degree of something that he needed. But I thought then, I said, how bad did God see what was coming ahead? If he stepped in when he did, and yanked that kid's mind, and yanked that kid's heart to say you need rehab, what did he know was happening tomorrow? What did he know was happening in 6 months? So if you have nothing else to be grateful for, be grateful for what you don't know. And be grateful that God does. That leads to S. That's the last letter. I was going to stop talking. I know you're excited. S is for sovereign. I think one of the hardest parts for us is people would always say, God is getting Nick is getting God is getting Nick through this. God is getting Nick through this. And it was hard for us because we knew that Nick wasn't really leaning on God. So it kind of felt like we were trying to give some impression that we had raised this wonderful spiritual kid who had just completely surrendered his life to God. It's hard to be a pastor's family because people, they just think that you're like just everything. Like Aaron thought I only listen to Christian music, and I'm like, seriously? I'm like, really? We've been best friends for how long? You just think that, and then they think all your kids are going to grow up to be missionaries. That's just the way. That's what it's going to be, and so people expect that Nick's getting through it because of his faith and his belief, and so that was hard. But we were doing the Philippians Bible study, and Paul, it said, he's faithful. He's confident in this, that he will be faithful for what he has started, he will bring it about to completion. And we had heard that scripture, but I really looked at it and I got so excited. I said, oh my gosh, he's talking about the promise that's been made to the church of Philippi. Paul's not talking about the promise that's been made to him. He's been talking about the promise that's been made to somebody else. And it's Paul's confidence in that promise that's going to bring it about to completion. And right then I knew that God was saving Nick's life because we believe the promise that he's made over him. Because God is sovereign and he sees it all. Most importantly, with sovereign, you have to trust God with rock bottom. You have to trust God. Because in December, with the horrific case that could have happened that didn't, Nick could have taken his life in December. We could have lost him. But can I tell you, Nick has never done better. I hadn't had to give him money since February 3rd. The boy's got his job. He just paid his rent for the first time last week, which is huge. Everything is doing great. He had the place that he was staying they had to close down for really good reasons because the guy was so great, and he's still a life coach to Nick. But Nick, on his own, secured a new recovery house to stay at, and he's doing great. But we had to trust God with rock bottom. In that moment, when they had called me, and I couldn't call John this time, I'm like, can I call him again? And finally I did, and we were both, that's it. All right, we're done. We're done. I don't know how being done, I don't know what it's going to look like, but we're done. We cannot do this. We can't do this anymore. But God knew that was Nick's rock bottom because it has opened his eyes. And we have to trust God with rock bottom. And I can tell you that not many parents, or there are many parents that bury their children. If they don't bury them, they watch them go through an entire life of addiction. They certainly don't get to see them with bouts of sobriety. And I am not dumb enough to realize that we'll have a long road ahead of us. And I'm not going to tell you that the next 6 months might not be hard. But I'm not going to take away from the fact that it can be great because God's in control. And I will take a rocky road over a road of destruction, I'll take that road. I've tried really hard to just to explain to you what our story is and what it's meant to me, and I did not want to tell you all of the details, but I wanted to tell you what details were necessary, and I hope that I was successful in that, and I hope that somewhere, whatever you're going through, if you're going through exactly what we're going through, or if you've been through that and you've been trying to figure out how to let it go, know there are people in this room, Brandy and Shane, that I've been so just like on a pedestal of the life of addiction that you've gotten over. I never knew I would have to draw on your story for my son. So I'm grateful to you for being these things to me. And as hard as it is, John and I are willing to be vulnerable to you. And your story may not be addiction. It may be something else. But whatever it is, you still need the direction of where you are. Figure it out and make a decision about where you're going. You still need to recognize that there's a reckless love that God loves you with, and no other option ever is going to love you that much. You still need to know that you need to live this life with a measure of vulnerability and not be ashamed, because it's in that shame that Satan quiets the testimony. You need to find gratitude in all of it. Thank Him for what you do see and be grateful for what you don't. And know that God is sovereign. He is in charge. And He's got it. He's got it. Just because it's not good does not mean it's not God. Just because something you're going through isn't good doesn't mean it's not just as much God as with anything else you're going through. And I hope that's what you've gotten. And to think about one of my favorite songs and favorite stories is about Mary in an alabaster box. And I've tried to put into words the cost of my praise. Because just like Mary, the price of her praise cost her everything. The room grew still as she made her way to Jesus. She stumbles through the tears that made her blind. She felt such pain, some spoke in anger, heard folks whisper, "There's no place here for her kind." Still on she came, through the shame that flushed her face, until at last she knelt before His feet. And though she spoke no words, everything she said was heard, as she poured her love for the Master from her arms of alabaster. And I've come to pour my praise on Him like oil from Mary's alabaster box. So don't be angry if I wash His feet with my tears and I dry them with my hair. but I thought I'd found. Until the day when Jesus came to me and healed my soul with the power of His touch. And now I'm giving back to Him all the praise He's worthy of. I've been forgiven, and that's why I love Him so much. And I've come to pour my praise on Him like oil from Mary's alabaster box. Don't be angry if I wash His feet with my tears and I dried it with my hair. My hair, 'cause you weren't there the night He found me. You did not feel what I felt when He wrapped His loving arms around me. And you don't know the cause of the oil. No, you don't know the cause of my praise. You don't know the cost of the oil in my alabaster box.
And as she said, the story continues to go on. But you know, she touched on something a while ago that really, I'm glad she did. As we've seen throughout this sermon series, God will allow you to go through things and He will test you. And as she said, you know, the first time we're falling apart, I've shared with you guys there were times that we were just in go mode, to where I was just preaching the sermon. I was glad to be here, but I was in survival mode. Same for her. But everything, when we finally said, okay, God's in control, God is great, so everything's going to be perfect, right? No. That's when something else happens. But it was great to see that no matter what, we were still trusting God. We learned that in that instance that God is still in control. And that's what I want to say to you guys. So whatever it is that you're facing, I don't want you to think that you have to face it alone. As she said numerous times, I cannot stress enough times how you have lifted us up. And just being here now. And I want everybody that's in this room to know that you have that same thing available to you. I read an article just before church this morning, and I posted it. Those of you on Facebook, I want you to read it. It was saying the reasons why, or the times you absolutely need to be in church. And the premise was that even when you don't feel like going, you need to be there. Because church is more than a place you go. It's a people that you come and you be with. And I don't know what it is that you're facing in your life. What is something that you need to surrender? You need to let go. Y'all gonna just make me cry. This proves the point of what I'm trying to say. Maybe you're trying to go through whatever it is you're facing alone. Don't do that. And don't be ashamed to come and tell somebody that I'm struggling and I need guidance. We may not have the answers, but we know who does. And even though you come and it may just be given a hug, it just may be encouraging. And so I want you to remember that. Shane's going to come up and sing a song, and I want you to listen to the words of this song. And if you need to be released from something, whatever it is that you are facing, whatever you're struggling, it could be addiction, Maybe you need to come and pray for someone you know that's in addiction. Maybe it's something that you're battling yourself. Maybe it's the battle of the mind. Maybe it is depression. You know, Lisa touched on it. What we've seen with Nick, we've learned so much about depression, anxiety, and mental health, and in addition to addiction. And I'll just step on my soapbox for a few minutes and then I'll get down. We've got a problem in this country where we overlook mental health, depression, anxiety, drug addiction, and all of that. There's not enough resources for it. I don't know what the answer is, but I will tell you. And that's one of the ways that we have been blessed. Not to dwell on it long, but just being real, we have spent money that we've not had. And you guys stepped up and y'all helped us tremendously. But we're still, if it wasn't, just being honest, if it wasn't for my mom and dad's credit card that we're paying, but to be honest, if it wasn't for that, and that burns me up because I know that there are people that don't have the family and they don't have the support that we have had from our parents. And so I don't even know how I got there. I just say that there is real people with real struggles. And what a great opportunity for us to be the church. And what a great opportunity. I learned through all of this because, you know, I've shared before, my dad was in law enforcement. My dad went to the schools. He did the drug talks. Remember McGruff? You know, McGruff, don't do drugs. I didn't have that struggle. I went, my dad comes to the school, he says, don't do drugs. I said, okay. I never tried anything. That was me. I've never had the desire to. I never did. But there are others, and I've learned in talking with Nick, because I always said, well, I never had that struggle. And it didn't register with me. Why would somebody want to do this? But in talking with Nick, he told me just the other day. He said, I remember this, I still don't comprehend it, but I have to see that this is where the addiction, this is where the mental health, and yes, this is where even the disease comes in. To where he said, I remember being a kid and saying, I can't wait to grow up and try drugs. And that blew my mind. But that shows me that it's a very real battle. And it's not discriminatory. It reaches people from all families. Because I always said it never hit my family. It didn't happen to my family. And boom, here it is. But the blessing, as our counselor told us to see the blessing in this is that it's opened my eyes to the needs around me. When I see somebody that's homeless and I wonder their story, instead of just saying get a job, I wonder what led them to that place right there. It's given me a compassion like I've never experienced before. And I was thinking about this the other day because I remember one thing Shane said to me. And Shane said that he's believing Nick will find God through this because that's what happened to him. And when Nick told us just a couple of weeks ago, said, I want you to know I found my higher power. And he said, now, it's not your higher power, your God. And then he says, that freak you out? I said, no. It doesn't, because I am still believing, and this is what you can pray with us for, that this is going to lead him to Jesus Christ. I'm believing that, and I know that. And so I will gladly walk this walk, as hard as it's been, if it brings him to Christ.
John, that was something I forgot to share, and I want to share it. Can you throw that picture up? Mm-hmm. And John and I, when we were taking Nick to rehab the first time, John was fixing his buffet, so you could like get a little bit away, you know. So I was like, Nick, maybe if you really like stay strong and stay committed to this, maybe you can design a tattoo about your recovery and we'll pay for it. So since John's fixing chicken bog, he's like, okay, and I'm like, you know. So then we get back, and I said, maybe now John's eating his food, so I've got a little bit, got a little bit more grace to play with here. And I said, maybe if that happens, maybe I'll design a tattoo about it and I'll get one with you if your dad would let me. He said, that sounds fine to me. And don't tell me yes, but one time, and then we're gone. So in October, we went and we talked. You see, look, is he beautiful? Is he beautiful? Do you see that smile? That's Nick. It's doing so good. See those gauges? Good Lord. You
Pick
know
your
what?
battles.
You know what? He's sober. Amen. He's sober. And I got him great smiley face gauges. I mean, if you're gonna have inch hole ears in the ears, you might as well have some smiley faces on. So, but we talked to the counselor to make sure the timing was good. And when we had taken him to the first rehab that didn't work out, and it was with good God reason, but I just was very anxious about it until I thought about what tattoo I wanted. And then I had this piece. So we ended up going, and we talked to the counselor. He said, I think it's a good time for you to do this. I think this is a nice time in his road. And mine wasn't supposed to be an arm sleeve, but but we went to, it's
She's
called,
got T-Rex arms.
yeah. So, but the place, the place, that is true. I mean, you can only put up 3 boxes where they're supposed to go, but the place is called Across the Skin, and across is spelled AA because the place is recovery. So everybody's in recovery. So the guy who I said I would like a box, and a box, a Clemson, a chain, and a USC thing, said, no, you must have these 3-dimensional boxes. And I'm like, really don't want those. But I was not charming this man. And I mean, he didn't even capitalize Lord. I had to beg him for that. I knew. But the whole time I'm getting this arm sleeve for 3 hours on my arm, and he's not talking to me, he and Nick are talking about recovery. And I knew that I was exactly where I needed to be, getting exactly what I needed, because that memory means way more to me than my arm sleeve that I didn't intend to get. But mine says, sons are a gift from the Lord, Proverbs 127:3. And each of these 3-dimensional boxes that cover my entire arm are gifts. And it represents what each of our boys have done to step into their adulthood and claim their life for their own. And for Thomas, he went to Clemson. Alan went to USC. I'm so sorry to his mama arm, but we're proud of him. And you can't really see it, but Nick has broken chains, and Nick is breaking the chains of addiction. And we could not be any more proud of one over the other because they've done it. And then for Nick, you can't really see it, but he and Shane had really talked about honesty, and that honesty would be like a new drug because you've been lying for so long. And then he started being honest about everything. We're like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're fine. We don't need to know all that. But that's the sun god of honesty and his options of God, you know. But in it says just for today, and it sounded like a loophole to me, which is why we brought it up at the counselor, like just for today. And the counselor was like, no, because you do it every day. So I told Nick, I said, can you just write under it, wake up and repeat, you know, like, can we because you know, I've got all these extra, ink on mine. You can have a few extra letters. But you can't see it, but the just for today has the music sign for repeat after it. So it's to do it over and over. And he wanted it to be in my handwriting, so that just for today is actually my handwriting. And there's a smiley face and a Y, just saying. But I wanted you to see that because sometimes you can hear these things about this kid and get him this visual. And I wanted you to see that kid. 4 years ago, we had a big thing about he's not mini-me. Now he's just lived with it. But that mini-me has got his smile back. And I'll take these arm sleeves and those, what are they called? Gauges, all day long. I don't want you to see them.
Yeah.
We were so much against tattoos, okay, especially my husband.
I love you
I
though.
love tattoos, but okay, so our youngest son, he went through teenagers. And when he turned, was 21? I don't remember. I have to go back and he didn't say anything, but he asked his daddy what his favorite Bible verse was. And he said, Psalm 1, blessed is the man who walks
not in the counsel of the ungodly,
yes.
or stand in the way of sin.
Okay, you know this. No, it was when he turned 70. Okay, so he was a little older. And he went on Facebook. And that's how we find out a lot of things on Facebook, right? On Facebook. and he took a picture and he said, "This is my daddy." So he had the whole, and he got long arms. The whole 3 verses, I think, of song. And he was, oh my gosh, got in the tube. And I cried of joy. I said, wait a minute, look past the tattoo.
Right.
They want tattoos, let them have tattoos. This young man is going to have this thing
Right.
all his life.
That's right.
You know, when he's 40 and 50 and 60, and he's going to tell people if they ask him, that was my daddy's favorite verse. You know?
Yeah.
Very good.
So,
There you go.
you have to reach them where they
You
are.
have to pick your,
Yes. So,
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for sharing that.
That's great.
I got a smiley face down here too. Oh, Lord, he's standing up.
Well, the Lord called me to the ministry 30 years ago this year. And so I've experienced some of the things that you've gone through. I've experienced them years before. And I kind of grew up that way because I was always taught the worst kids in the neighborhood are the pastor's kids.
Yeah.
And so I've experienced that as an ex-pastor. I minister now in a nursery, as you know, and to the elderly. But so I've been there, done that. And so I know what you're going through. My boys, I know that they smoke pot. I know that. We've caught them. We've seen evidence. But prayer is what helped us.
Amen.
So,
Yeah. And I like what you said. Thank God for the things that we don't know.
Oh, God.
That's
Oh,
right.
yeah. Be grateful for those.
Well, and thank y'all. And again, it's because of y'all that we face that. And that's why I say we go through all of this together. That's the beauty of the church.